Okay, hello everyone. Today is April 11th, 2020. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF certified meeting, so please be nice to each other. And yeah, let's have a productive meeting today. All that's on the agenda is regarding continued work on the Admin Network Policy API. I think other initiatives have kind of slowed down in response to getting this done. So thanks for all the reviews so far. Today, I guess we probably won't need the whole time because a lot of it can just be done on the PR, but I thought it might be easier to go through some of the comments here and maybe hash some things out.
Hey guys, I just wanted to say hi. You don't think I ran away? So I was gonna be here 5 minutes. I had surgery on Friday for my bum hip, but I'll be back on the next meeting again.
All good, no worries.
Take care, guys.
Okay, so I guess I can just honestly go to the PR. Thanks Rahul and Yang for also chiming in on a few of these. I went through and responded to all of Dan's and Casey's nits and smaller things and push changes and resolve those comments. So everything that should be open now is stuff that we can discuss. I guess first of all, because we talked about this last week, didn't really come to an output. And one of the things we wanted to do was get this contributor from Calico to also comment here. So I reached out to him and asked him to do so. He went in a little bit more about why he doesn't like overloading the priority equals 0 value in terms of evaluating rules beneath network policy. So that's another vote against. I think that's along with Dan's as well. So I think,
yeah. When I commented that, yeah, this is not very easy to understand the description, and you said that you tried rewriting it, I was implying more there is no easy way to describe this because it's too complicated.
Yeah. When I read that sentence again like 3 times, I was like, yeah, okay, fair enough. This makes no sense. So I think as a group, it's not a super complex API change, right? We either have to say 0 is overloaded and means this, or I guess we have a Boolean value, right? I mean, is there another? He outlined some things here as well.
Why did we get rid of baseline or having 2 separate objects, default network policy or baseline network policy, whatever?
At the end of the day, I think one of the major reasons, well, 2 major things. First of it was a lot of duplication, and it was a lot more stuff to reach consensus on. Secondly, going back to the user stories, our main user story for default network policy was really only one, and it was to flip the baseline allow of a cluster, right? Those are why we ended up wanting to lump it into one object.
Yeah, to add to that point, this is why we sort of like agree on 0 being the special priority by then, because for the baseline or default network policy per se, we didn't find the use case that makes sense to basically specify allow rules in there, which means that because for the cluster default everything is allowed. So if you have something below network policy and says, allow this and deny this, we didn't think, allow makes sense there. So we're thinking something in the lines of, if we do have the baseline policy, we do the same implicit isolation, just like the network policy, which doesn't make sense at all as well, because that will mean that for the 2 CRDs we're proposing, one has a different semantics than the other, right? So that's why we decided maybe since the default denying some things will be the only use case here, then we might as well sort of like shove it into the current admin network policy and try to be quote unquote smart here. But I guess 0 isn't actually a good decision then.
Because yeah, it seems like we could just have so either have a separate object, admin default network policy, whatever, possibly with no priority value, but otherwise identical to to this one and then say it goes first admin network policy, then network policy, then default or admin default network policy. Or alternatively, I guess, have some field in addition to priority, which I think the Calico guy may have been saying.
Yeah, that's basically was what he was asking. I obviously he probably didn't know about the separate object approach. I, for one, think adding another object isn't necessarily the right thing to do here. But I also agree that 0 is not a great way to do it either. What do you think, Yang and Rahul?
So a question first. Did we ever decide or get any other user stories for having lots and lots of default default admin network policies? Like we've always theorized that someone might want to do this, but when it comes to brass tacks, like, yeah, that was my feeling. I just wanted to clarify.
So one thing is that, assuming at some point we end up with north-south in admin network policy, then people may want to have default policies that are slightly more complicated by that, like deny everything to outside the cluster, but or what is it? Baseline deny everything outside the cluster, but not everything within the cluster, and things that might be most easily expressed with multiple rules rather than a single rule. Although, I mean, even then, you would be able to do that with multiple rules within a single priority 0
right
object. So
yeah, I guess what I was trying to get at is, like, if we ditch like if there's only one priority for baseline, whether it's a separate object or using some special identifier here, I think that's okay, right? Like, no one's disputing that.
I'm continuing to vaguely dispute it from a theoretical standpoint, but I have no specific practical arguments. We may see, and if we do, then we could change it in beta or alpha 2 or whatever.
I personally am strongly against the separate object. I mean, I think it's gonna, for users, it's just gonna be another complication in an already complicated array of objects for network security policy in the Kubernetes cluster, right? Because then one day, if we add another one for firewall or whatever, you're gonna have network policy, admin network policy, default network policy, firewall. Like, it's just, I can see it exploding. All, whereas in terms of usability, it can be handled in this API pretty easily. Now, in terms of number of priorities for the base, again,
I mean, let's just assume for now that we're sticking with a single priority for baseline.
yeah.
But this, I'm actually realizing there's another API difference between baseline policies and non-baseline policies, which is that it makes no sense to say action pass in a baseline policy, right?
Or action allow, really, right? Or,
well, if you have multiple rules, you might have, allow some and then deny everything that doesn't match that first rule.
Right. I see what you're saying. But yeah, you're right. 100%. Pass makes no, and that's been brought up before. It makes no sense in terms of a priority equals 0 policy or baseline policy. But I think, especially now, I had just actually, you had asked, there was another comment about validation. And I found a new feature that's as of 123 implemented that allows us to do a lot more complicated validation, like to the point where we could literally say, if we are at the special priority, you can't set pass as an action. Like, we can build that into the API. Let me pull that up really quick. It's actually kind of cool. Laura from the multi-cluster working group showed me this. It's called,
Wow.
yeah, so like X Kubernetes Validations. And so that gives us a lot more power and validation. So I think that would be a way around this. Seems like a pretty powerful construct.
I wasn't worried so much about the expressing validation as I was just saying. So, there are two semantic differences, at least, between default and non-default policies. One being that they don't have priority, and two being that they can't use pass.
Right.
So that was a not great argument for, so maybe they should be their own object, but
right.
And then, yeah, I mean, see, the thing is, having it be a completely different object makes it easier to talk about them. So when you say
100%.
pass, right, like, you'd say then it goes on to the network policies and the default network policies, rather than saying then it does the network policies and then it does the admin network policies of priority 0. Or it skips all admin network policies except for the ones with priority 0, and things like that. Like, having it be a separate object makes it easier to talk about it as a separate thing, which it really is.
So, okay, yeah, agreed. Has something like a dual spec object ever been done before? Is that crazy? Like literally have two different specs within an AMP, like a AMP spec or?
No, I mean the like spec versus status is a convention so that people can build tooling around it, and so you don't want to do something almost but not quite.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was out of the box for sure. I mean, I'll entertain it for a second. So say we want to make a new object, don't we have to go back and?
No, you don't need a cap per. Well, I mean, I guess it is somewhat of a change from what we agreed on in the cap, but we just amend the cap.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, the cap already is going to be amended.
Caps are living documents, so
yeah.
And even in terms of the API, it wouldn't be that much different, because you could reuse a lot of the struct types. I mean, I guess if you want to have a spec with no priority, then you can't reuse that. So yeah, it's not totally.
You would reuse some of the nested types, which gets messy. But there's some prior work with that. Like, I will say something like the Gateway API, they have a ton of types. I mean, they have a ton of objects. Like, they have a ton of different objects. And I'm pretty sure their APIs use types interchangeably between them.
Yeah.
I think Gateway is a good example. I'm pretty convinced by the whole build another object argument. That doesn't seem so crazy to me.
It would definitely be easier to explain usability, like Dan's saying, which is a big plus. I'm trying to think of the biggest negatives as well to doing that, right?
Like, in terms of comprehensibility in a running cluster, I think we've always decided that we just need better tooling. Like, whether it's one object or two, we'll have to build a tool for users to reason about these at scale. So it'll hopefully abstract away some of the multiple objects business.
And we do want good tooling, but part of the reason why we've gotten in the habit of saying we need good tooling is because we have bad objects.
Yeah.
And so the comments that I made about end port in the thing, like, we define it in this sort of weird way in network policy because we had to for backward compatibility, but we could just like define things better, and then you don't have to worry about the good tooling as much because the object is more self-describing and easy to understand on its own.
Yeah.
We should always aim for that first, and then good tooling as a fallback when we can't solve everything.
And we're not really bound to too many previous constructs here, which is powerful, right? But at the same time, we don't want to jar users. So something with a finite detail like endport, the subset of users that are actually implementing that, I feel like aren't huge. So we could change those semantics pretty easily, but some of the other stuff, if we do change, we might need tooling just for usability. But anyway, so if there's no objections, I mean, I can prototype breaking this out into its own object. And I guess, would I lump that into this PR? Or would I do it in a separate PR? Like, what's easiest for review if I prototype something like this? We're going to get a lot of yelling. I mean, it's only 4 of us here, right? So I don't think Tim is, maybe he might like this. But at the end of the day, like throughout this PR or throughout this work, there's been, 15 engineers come and go. So like now if we overhaul everything at the very end, there's nothing to stop those people coming back and screaming, right?
I mean, so this is why I was asking about, why did default network policy go away? Like if there was some killer reason for getting rid of it, then okay, we don't want to bring it back. But if it was just one of the, if it was more, well, it made sense at the time. And, now that we're deciding that priority 0 is complicated, then maybe some of the decisions that we made before, don't make as much sense. And so I would not call this a total overhaul.
Yeah. I mean, I think Yang hit the nail on the head why we got rid of it originally. I can't think of anything else. But you are right. If we do involve north-south, it could lead to more complicated scenarios, which obviously we weren't considering back then. And back then we couldn't come to a consensus on anything. So the goal was to narrow the consensus space down as far as we could and move forward, right? Okay. Yang, do you have a big objection to me prototyping, breaking it into in its own object? Like, would you rather see just a toggle, like a priority class, or any other thoughts?
To be really honest, I don't have a strong opinion.
I know.
I do feel like that we probably needed to, if we do make a separate object like a default or baseline network policy, we needed to not go into the same sort of like a loop that we did before. And I'm still thinking on a couple of things. First of all, for the baseline policy, if we do make another object, do we actually still need a priority to be there? Because I was hearing 2 different things, right? Because one is that when we have north-south in the future, then we might need a little bit more complicated default rules. And that may, warrant for different priorities for the default policy, which I don't think will be a good idea, because now we will have the same conversation on how many priorities we wanted to support for the default policies. And I don't think anything above something like 5 make any sense. But, since if we do support priority, that becomes another conversation that we needed to tackle. And people may come in and say, why do you have 1,000 priorities for this object, but have 5 for the other, right? What's your reasoning behind this? This is something, we have to explain. Just like the Ingress Egress rule count, right? We just basically set the arbitrary number that we think makes sense, but it may be a little bit hard to convey that to other people. This is my only concern. But if we can make the other object really succinct and really easy to use, I have absolutely no problem with it.
I guess I feel like if people come to us with reasonable objections about the limited number of priorities or Ingress rules or whatever, then we should listen to their objections and maybe change the API. And if they come to us with bad objections, then we just say, no, you're wrong, and here's our reasoning for having done it this way. So I don't feel like that's that big a deal.
Yeah. And I do think not having the priority for the default admin network policy, or whatever we want to call it, is one of the pros to moving it to its own object, right? I mean, that's another reason it's a totally different object.
Although the flip side of that is, if we later decide, oh yeah, we do need priorities for baseline or for default network policies, then if we have it as its own separate object, we can just add the priority field at that point. Whereas if it was, priority 0, then it becomes a lot harder to try and retrofit multiple priorities on in that case, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think what I would advocate for that might make more sense with default is no priority field. But maybe for default network policy, we build in multiple applied to, so you can still express different sets of subjects within a single policy, right? Then we never have to talk.
Oh, I didn't even think about that.
Like we might not have, I don't think we're going to have nearly as complicated scenarios, and our use cases show us that we're probably, even with north-south, not going to have as complicated scenarios at a baseline level. Like we just need to be able to express the most complicated scenario in our case is expressing that we want to change the default behavior for pod set A in a certain way and pod set B in a different way, which you couldn't do with one object right now, right? But if you give multiple subjects, that goes away.
But you can have, we eventually said you can have multiple policies with the same priority, right? It's just not defined what happens if they conflict.
Correct. Yeah.
And in that case, since every default network policy in the end has to basically just be about denying, then they can't really conflict. So if the user wants to create 2 different default network policies which have the same priority but different apply tos.
Fair enough.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially if they have different apply tos.
Yeah, then it doesn't matter. And we're thinking, yeah, so it would be a pretty simple object then, right? I mean, the only action would be.
Well, no, you still want the allow and deny. I would say it should basically just be a copy of admin network policy, except without priority, and you can't have action pass.
Yeah.
Is there a cube builder way to force it to be a singleton?
No. You might be able to validate that the name is a particular string.
Okay, interesting. I mean, I think there's real value in enforcing that it is a singleton, because if you've built a complicated allow deny chain and then you just make a bunch of objects, you're in for a bit of a treat when you try to understand what it's actually going to do. And if we can just say, no, really, you don't want to be here. If we can force that, that would be ideal, I think.
Yeah, but that leaves use cases on the table. I agree with you, but then it goes back to you can only have one AMP.
Yeah, I think
Well,
we're
then we
going to
can
have to see how people use this and then.
Like if we force everyone to be a singleton, we can always, I think, walk back on that. I think we can remove the validation and say, all right, Wild West, be free and do whatever you like.
I'm not sure. I think I will. I think we have enough alignment here for me to go ahead and try making, just type this up in actual code, have a prototype of it and see what you all think.
I'll help on this.
So actually, now that I think about this, maybe like doing the singleton CRD validating, requiring it to have the name default or whatever, like maybe that would be good in the beginning, because it's easy if people show up with use cases and say, but I need to do this and I can't do it. And then we can say, okay, we'll let you have multiple, whereas in the other case, people, God only knows what they'll do. And then we're stuck with supporting everything.
Yeah, that's the key, is we don't want to be stuck. We don't want to be stuck, unable to, like, we don't want to put too much in and have bad design. We'd rather, have less and then expand as we move forward, because that'll be a lot.
Just 1 second. I'm just trying to understand it a little bit clearer here. So what is exactly the benefit of having a singleton here? Is it just people can see all the baseline rules in a single policy, so they can see clearly what conflicts with each other or not? Is that their argument for a singleton?
Well, what I was thinking was we're going to have allow rules and deny rules. And there's they're like an ordered list within an object where we're saying, allow XYZ, but then deny, some other set and whatever, right? There's some complicated chain. What happens when I create two of these objects? According to our spec, it's, dealer's choice. Like he will, like, I don't know, alphanumeric, lexically sort the objects or something. Like it gets messy when you have multiple things at the same priority. And with ANP, it's hard to enforce that because no one wants to put in an admission webhook. But here, if we're just saying it's the baseline, let's just make it a singleton, then we can reduce the scope of complexity.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, and then we can
And
always
also,
expand
like,
in the future. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say also the use cases that we had, they're all expressible in a single object with a single subject, right? Like there's, make all of the, enforce boundaries between all tenants. But in that case, it's like you're creating a single set of rules that apply equally to everyone, right? There weren't use cases for baseline policy where you need to get nitpicky about, namespace A and namespace B can talk to each other in this way, which is different from everyone else.
Right.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. The only thing that I can think of that might violates this is that, but this is more, I think maybe north-south specific, is when, people come in and say, for this set of namespaces, I want by default, they cannot talk to a specific CIDR. And for these namespaces, by default, they cannot talk to another specific CIDR. Then you will have to specify two different objects for these. I don't know if that's possibly a scenario, but but that will be the only.
But that would be above. Wouldn't, like, in that case, you're saying like you would just write that with AMP standard rules at the end of the day, because you don't want network policies to be able to override that, right? If you're a cluster admin doing that and there's a dangerous subnet somewhere.
Right. That makes sense.
Dan's right. Like I've told, and this, I think I used this as an argument for how we were doing AMP baseline rules, was like the only use case we had was flip the default context of the cluster. And like, that would be really easy with this.
So, but I think, so we have decided that we're going to keep a limit on number of rules that you can write in an ANP, right? I mean, that applies to default network policy as well. So would that mean all the use cases for a default network policy should be covered by just 100 rules?
We believe so, much less than that.
I mean, and also, do we have a restriction on how many apply tos that we can have?
We don't have multiple apply tos in a single object anymore.
Oh, we don't have?
No, not in the current version of the API.
I see. So if I'm gonna have just one CRD for all the default network policies, would a single apply to would work for us? Or?
Our determination is that based on the use cases we have so far, it will easily solve that. And in the future, if customers bring us valuable use cases stating otherwise, we can look at expanding. Because this is just V1 Alpha 1. Especially it'd be easier if it's in its own object.
Right. So right now, if I'm understanding correctly, for the baseline policy, we're saying that the use case we can only imagine right now is that the apply to will always be something like the entire cluster, and that's it.
Right. or just one apply to, even if it's a complex match expression, like all non-system namespaces, right? That the admin's doing.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
I see. Interesting. I mean, that makes it like a little bit restrictive, I would say. But let's see. I mean, if somebody else will have like any issues with that. But I think, yeah.
And I'll try to update this on the API in a comment, and I'll link it in the agenda. So if there's more thoughts, we can talk about it there. But for now, I'd like to move forward and talk about some other stuff, if that's all right with everyone.
Got it. Yeah.
Yes, please.
I mean, so one thing I would like to, I mean, maybe like that's something that on my mind is like the like deny versus allow. I mean, if we are going to override just the Kubernetes network policies, we might as well go to just the allow only specific policies. But yeah, that's something that we can actually think a little bit more, I think. I mean, if that simplifies the whole thing a little bit more.
Can you explain that again? I'm kind of confused.
So,
mean.
I mean, I'm saying like, so if we have to just override like the Kubernetes network policies, um, do we even need deny policies for default network policies?
I think the
Because
deny would be more important. We aren't default network policy isn't overriding network policy, it's beneath it. Right?
yeah,
So say right now, like if you go to a Kubernetes cluster, everything can talk to everything. We want
Mhm.
traffic that falls through AMPs and network policy to automatically be denied. We do that with a default network policy, a default deny blanket.
yeah, got it, yeah,
Cool.
I think yeah, maybe a deny makes sense here.
Okie doke. Cool. So I'll give that a shot and we'll see what people think of it. And I'll try to leave a comment either on the API itself or something in the comments to explain how we got here. But it was basically from this meeting. I took some notes in the agenda. Please add if I miss anything because I'm talking and trying to write. I'm never good at that. Okay, next one. Next major one anyway, I think. Well, I know we talked about, this ugly semantics we have, right? So we have a lot of ugly semantics here in the name of explicitness and extensibility, and Dan is not a fan. The first one being how we've defined a admin network policy subject. So I agree with Dan. It's pretty ugly, but I think Rahul did a good job of kind of explaining why we ended up here. Do you have
so that definitely explains why you can't smush them into a single or always have the namespace selector and only sometimes have pod selector. My initial suggestion though was we could at least get rid of a little bit of the redundancy in the naming. If you scroll back up, you can see, and that's still possible. But the other thing is reading through this is, and then I come back to this later, I really think that we're going to have to require implementers to add or to implement a admission hook, and figure out carefully like how to make sure that the implementation is only getting admin network policies that it knows how to implement, because like the cases where there are too many cases where you can't do anything reasonable if you don't, fully understand the policy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually curious. Like, we got a lot of pushback from folks when we talked about having admission controllers
a ton of it
in SIG network. And I mean, does that still apply here, or like, are we just saying like the admission controller is now just a nice to have? Or, I mean, I don't know. I agree with Dan. I think for a security construct, it's better to just fail the apply than to rely on a status field. But
I guess I don't remember those discussions.
It was pretty old. It was basically like there is no way in hell you can enforce a user or a CNI to also implement or deploy an admission controller. Like that was the answer back then. And because then you're enforcing some extra workload, right? We're not just writing an API, we're also saying like you have to run this pod on your cluster. And I guess it's not a pod.
But I mean, like, how are they implementing the API with pods in the cluster, right? I mean, like, yeah, we're requiring them to write some code, but we're already requiring them to write code.
Yeah, but what if you want to implement admin network policy on a reduced, a small footprint cluster that doesn't want to deploy any webhooks? Like,
but I mean, but like the webhook doesn't have to be something like you have to have something that is watching for changes to admin network policy objects anyway, right?
mm-hmm.
That same process could be running your admission webhook.
I mean, there's two separate things though, right? There's the admission webhook and then validation done by the implementation. Those are two separate things, right? Or are you saying they're lumped into one?
The admission webhook is the validation done by the implementation. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we could. I mean, that's I feel like every implementation for network policy does that today anyway.
Well, I mean, no, but like with an actual admission webhook, like
Okay.
it is not enough for the implementation to validate everything when it gets the informer notification. Like we need to prevent bad admin network policies from being created. Yeah, I mean, read my last comment.
I mean, I get these are problems, but I also don't know if these are problems we should have to solve in the API itself. Like we say, this is what we want. We can say, this is what we want you to do if you don't understand it, right?
Right, but I'm saying that even doing that it places limits on us in the future. Like we can then only extend it in ways such that people will be able to misunderstand it correctly, basically.
Wait. I don't get that. I don't understand.
Like the thing that you said, okay, well, they just block all traffic. And I point out, okay, well, that means we can't extend admin network policy to cover Multis in the future. Now, admittedly, we've not talked about doing that at all, but that's just like an idea of, if you say, they block all traffic to the selected pods, then that means you're assuming that they know what all traffic means and that they know which pods are selected. And so that limits the ways that we could be changing it in the future, because we're requiring them to understand policies that they don't understand.
I do think that makes a little bit sense to me, is in the way that, if let's say a CNI cannot actually comprehend an AMP, I do not personally feel that we should do something different than just ignoring it. That's my personal opinion on this. Like if we do something different, for example, like we just block all traffic towards or from the selected workloads, that doesn't really feel correct to me.
Yeah, I mean, Dan's point shoots a huge hole in that, right? Because you can't, if you change the definition of all traffic, right?
No, not only that, but like what about the thing is, like when people they write a policy which they think is supposed to block traffic, ingress traffic towards these workloads, right? And then you apply the policy, the CNI doesn't really comprehend it. And what it did was to block all traffic. And he tested out and say, hey, this works, right? He would never be checking that whether CNI has, correctly comprehended or not. And that doesn't really feel like a correct behavior to me.
But it can apply both ways now because we have allow and deny rules. Like, yeah.
Right. Like I think either allowing traffic not allowed by the network policy or denying traffic not denied by the network policy, I think both of those are bad behaviors. We should just reject the network policy.
There's no standard definition of fail close. That's the thing, right? We don't have a with network policy, maybe we did, right? But with this, we don't.
So here's a question. have we decided how we're going to do conformance? Because if we require all CNIs to pass our conformance test, we have a sort of backdoor way of forcing them to do a validation hook, where we're basically saying, if I try to apply this policy, like this garbage policy, you have to reject me outright. Like it's a little
No, it's a
sketchy.
good idea.
I mean, that's not even backdoor. Like if Kubernetes core is not rejecting the policy and we have a test that says the policy has to get rejected, then that's part of the API.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question was, how do you test that, right? It's not a traffic test per se. How do you test, quote unquote, this needs to be rejected outright?
Yeah,
I mean, if we
there's no way to write
require
it.
them to do the admission controller, then we try to create the object and confirm that the creation fails.
Well, I guess if this only works if there's some way for the CNI to tell us what it supports, right? Because the test would have to say, you claim you support XYZ. We've added alpha. I expect you to reject alpha. Well, we can only write the I expect you to reject alpha test if the CNI is reporting what it can do, which I don't know if we have that capability.
Yeah, that sounds a whole lot like versioning.
Yeah, I feel like that's an even larger scope than the mission webhook. And then we're basically having a standard, the CNI needs to confirm not only implementing some sort of like a webhook, but also have a way to report what feature sets that it's supporting for AMP, right?
So can I take a step back? Correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, you might know this. I'm not an admission webhook expert. You could literally, you're saying you just run this webhook as a process in that same whatever pod that's running the implementation itself. Like it doesn't have to be a separate deployment.
Yes, I can confirm that Entria does that. Yes.
And is that something then we would also need to maintain and write upstream, I would assume, right?
No, each implementation would have to do its own validation, right? Like, because you want them to be validating that they understand the policy, not that we think it's valid.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm not sure here. I do know that we got a lot of pushback when we last said something about enforcing this.
The problem being that if we actually do that, then in the API level or in the upstream level, we need it to be 100% crystal clear on what are supported and what are not supported, maybe even exhaust all the possible scenarios there, so that CNIs can have a thing to follow on to basically test their own admission webhook to see if these are behaving correctly. Otherwise, if we're just slightly vague in somewhere and two CNIs interpreted it differently, then we have a problem because they're implementing different behavior webhooks or something like that. Or maybe we can get around with the problem by doing some sort of like a webhook code in the API and say CNI support this. I don't know if it's a
right,
good
that's
idea.
what I was thinking.
I mean, so like the CRD validation will still happen. So like they can't accept syntactically invalid AMP objects or anything like that. And I mean, the webhook API only allows you to do so much. So either they're, if they're correctly implementing a webhook, then all they're going to be able to do is say, yes, I can support this object, or no, I can't support this object. I don't think this is a big deal.
Okay. That object being whatever version, it's just whatever version of the API they're using, right? Like whatever version they have locally.
It would be whatever version of the CRD is installed.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think we're going to have to recommend as a tooling user level thing, always make sure that you're using validate equals true with kubectl create. To make sure that you don't create an ANP using objects that the API server doesn't understand. Maybe I should write up more about what I mean about all of this.
Yeah, I think if you could add to that comment a little bit, because I think the end rationale shortened is basically we don't have a clear-cut way to fail closed, but we still want extensibility. So it can't just be done 100% at the API design level, right? So something along those
So
lines.
I mean, so my thought process on this is like, so in the core API server, we might have some admission webhook that says whether a particular policy that is created by a customer is, like follows some guidelines or not. From I think from a CNI implementation perspective, I think we thought we are going to have a status field, right? I mean, it can say that, oh, this version of network policy, admin network policy is not supported by us. I mean,
Right, but Dan doesn't
if-
even want that because you can't fail closed if you're just reporting. So this is the whole problem, right? The user would create it, we would already be failed, messed up. We'd be messed up. We'd be failed, period. And we'd report back status saying, okay, we think we're messed up, but then that behavior is indeterministic. I mean, it's, yeah.
And then, I mean, you're saying like anytime you create an admin network policy, you are expected to check the status of it to see if it's really doing what you intended for it to be doing.
I mean, Dan, I think we agree
Right.
with you, but we went through this same conversation like 6 months ago or 8 months ago.
Can you find that conversation?
I'm gonna look for it. I am. I put it on my list to do because we were explicitly told like there was no way around this, and we ditched the idea. Like I know that for sure, and I think, yeah, that's what I'm pretty sure happened.
So if we have multiple validations, so we would expect multiple admission webhooks to run for the admin network policy, because I think we're gonna have our own version of admission webhook, right, from the API perspective.
No, the API would not be doing an admission webhook. The API provides the Kube Builder CRD validation, and then the
No, I think,
network
but I think we
plugin
are planning
does the
to,
admission
but
webhook.
right, but we are planning to do some kind of admission webhook as well. For example, number of rules. The only way we can validate the number of rules.
We talked about that in one of the other, or actually we haven't talked about it in the meeting, but we discussed it in the PR that we should just change the numeric validation to work in a way that works with Kube Builder and say you can have 100 of each rather than 100 total, since we don't actually care about the specific numbers.
I see. So I mean, like, but I mean, even in future, we might have like some cases where we want to do admission webhook on the API side. Would be
Okay, so maybe this is the conversation that was had before. We cannot provide an admission webhook as a third-party component and say all clusters that are going to want to use admin network policy also have to run this webhook, which we provide off to the side somewhere. That's different from saying the implementer of the admin network policy is required to, as part of their own implementation, provide a webhook, which I think is reasonable and acceptable.
You hit the nail on the head. That was the angle I believe we took the original time. But if you could just write that on your comment, Dan, to persist that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, like we said that, yeah, so we're gonna have the core API have one admin webhook, right? I mean, that's what we decided on, and then
the core, we can't do that, right? The core API doesn't have a webhook. It's just built-in validation into the API itself. That's all we do. And then we say that implementations need to provide this webhook. So implementations have the responsibility that if a user applies a policy that they do not understand, the implementation needs to tell that user no, like you can't apply it, does not work. right? We're putting that burden on the CNI, and Dan's saying that's all right, which I don't think we thought about before, ever.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's a fair point, I think.
And I'm all right with that. And then in that conversation, we've talked about a lot. These are kind of all lumped together, which is nice because we're unraveling stuff pretty quickly. We have 5 minutes left, so I'll just try to tie some of this up. Another thing we kind of talked about was we have been trying to decide how to bound the number of rules. I think this comment lays it out there pretty well. Like, I don't think any of us have a super hard inclination on how to do this. So the easiest way might just be to straight up say max 100 ingress and 100 egress. And I think that would satisfy Tim's desire to not have unbounded lists, and is something that we can do in tree with KubeBuilder validations. Not difficult at all. So if no one has objections to that, I'll make that change. Okay. Next thing that I think we could iron out quickly is the name field. Dan's question is why, what is this for, right? And I think I tried to give an answer here. There is no, we have to have this function rationale for this field, period. I tried to give some reasons why I think we need it, why I think it's nice to have, why I think it's nice to have it now rather than later. But at the end of the day, it's another thing I don't feel super strongly about. So if folks have more opinions on it, please let me know. Name field for ingress/egress rules.
I think, I believe this is for observability perspective. I think if there is some kind of an implementation where we can identify what rule was responsible for allowing specific traffic, I mean, or denying specific traffic. I mean, it's actually depends on how the CNI would do, right? I mean, it's just an advanced feature that the CNI can have. And
okay,
like,
so we should just say that in the documentation, like say this is an optional identifier. The implementation may use this in debugging or observability information to make it, or for instance, to explain why a packet was accepted or dropped, something.
Yeah. That's fair enough. I mean, because I think one of the reasons why we wanted to include this is because we have multiple, I mean, not anymore, like multiple applies to before, and I mean, just specifying the policy might not be enough to identify the exact rule, but yeah.
Yeah, I think this in combination with the status field is something CNIs could 100% use to report useful information to the user. Because I know, for example, I know we haven't done, and then in the future, like it also is helpful like for logging and other things if we added logging to this, because trying to express what rule is dropping or allowing traffic is tricky when you just have like a list of ingress and egress with no identifiers. Okay, 3 minutes left. That's small. That was in relation to separating out default network policy into its own object. Sorry, I've been saying the wrong terms over and over again because I'm moving fast. Default admin network policy. Okay, I guess one of the other big subjects was total refactoring of, the ports and.
Oh, the one, yeah, okay. The one about ports ought to be in subject and not ingress, like that was more of a, it would be nice, but yeah, no, ignore that. I realized that was more a comment for the KEP, not for the implementation.
Okay, no worries. I think the more of it was this one that was more relevant. All parts of this are terrible. And Rahul agreed.
I didn't want to say anything other than add to Tim, because this is completely his idea. When he brought this up, I remember I was really opposing it. So
Yeah. Tim still hasn't done a pass, and I know it's on his list. So let's let him do a pass on this. I think this is easy for us to change. It's semantics of this. We aren't changing the type. Like, we're just changing the internal semantics of the type. We're not like removing or adding it or anything. So I do agree with Dan. For your reference, Dan, we had these like brainstorming sessions right before we merged the KEP with Tim, and he changed a bunch of stuff before giving the LGTM. And that's how we ended up with this whole thing. And he wanted to be extremely explicit about everything, like to the max. And I think we all wanted to after network policy because we're scared of implicitness.
But like, I mean, that's what I was saying about the time of day thing. Like, if we accept this argument, then that means you can't extend it, because if you extend it, then you're admitting that not specifying something means it's unspecified. And so
yeah,
in that case, not specifying ports should mean it's unspecified, right?
Yeah, I think as long as we're clear in the API and the documentation about what it means, then it's easy, right? I think some of the problems in network policy, specifically with implicitness and empty selectors versus nil things, et cetera, was that at each level of nesting, we weren't super specific in the API, which I think we can be here, right? So whether the whole admin network policy ports struct is nil or empty versus like one of the internal fields of that port, it's a little bit easier to be specific. Okay, let's let Tim comment on that. This is more to that as well. We'll let Tim comment on those semantics. We already talked.
But I think if it pleases, we can make you build a default value, right? Saying that, which explicitly says that if you don't specify anything, it's allow all ports, or some sort of.
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
can do it. It's just about what we want to express, right? Like this is, I feel like, a purely semantic conversation.
Yeah.
And I don't feel too strongly about it as long as we're clear and explicit in the docs and the API. And these docs are going to be a lot of work, let me tell you. I can already see it coming.
Maybe just to seed it for next time, we have a lot of instances, which I think Dan has rightly pointed out are kind of weird, of a pointer to a Boolean that may only be true. And yeah, like especially for the self and not self, I think there's compelling alternatives for doing it another way. Maybe we want to revisit that. I don't know.
For the record, I did not actually like any of the ideas that I came up with for squishing self and same labels and not self and not same labels together. Which I was just hoping somebody else could be cleverer than I was.
I would like to spend some time thinking about it. We've already actually squished it really far from where we started, so we've made some progress. Again, I'm pretty sure this was a decision towards the end of the KEP to get it merged, and there might be a better way to do it, but it would be awesome if someone comes up with a better idea, because I don't know, but I think that'll be a task for the next week and review.
So the other thing is, I think if we really do have these true only Booleans, I think you can make it just an empty struct, and then I believe it would let you specify it as just self : with nothing, and that would be recognized as different from self : nil. I think,
because you wouldn't be able, with an empty struct, you wouldn't be able to put self : nil, right? It would report error.
It would be a pointer to an empty struct.
Okay, then it would.
So yeah, maybe you would have to explicitly provide the braces in order for that to work then.
Right. I'm not sure. I was trying to think of other ways around it, and this is how we landed here. Yeah, it's messy for sure. I think, again, though, this is less of this is more semantics than a true design question. So we can hash this out more easily just here on the PR itself for sure. But let's keep that conversation open. I'll keep those comments open and ensure I don't resolve them. Okay, so wrapping up, I think we have a couple good action items to take from this. I'm going to try to put kind of a summary in the agenda here really quickly and just go over some of the things we still want to talk about. I think some of the two big ones are, well, three big ones, the north-south discussion, which is an issue, which I would highly encourage everyone to go put their thoughts down. The next one is the semantic redesign of ports and the semantic redesign of some of our, you know, only true Booleans and stuff like that. Otherwise, I think we're making good progress. Is there anything else folks want to talk about before we get out of here? I know we're 5 minutes over. Sorry about that. Okay. Thanks so much for all your help here. Let's keep chugging forward, keep this momentum up, and I'm gonna poke Tim and be like, hey, give us a review.
He's busy with 1.24 finalizing, which I think goes out today. So
okay, cool. But you've been busy with that too, haven't you?
less busy than Tim.
Yeah, no, totally understandable. Cool. Okay. Thanks so much for all the hard work, folks. Let's keep it rolling, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks again.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, bye.